Hello and welcome to Underdogs, Bootstrappers, and Game Changers. This is for those of you that are starting with nothing and using business to change their stars. Motivating people who disrupted industry standards. This is the real side of business. This isn't Shark Tank. My aim with this podcast is to take away some of the imaginary roadblocks that are out there. I want to help more underdogs because underdogs are truly who change the world. This is part of our Content for Good initiative. All the proceeds from the monetization of this podcast will go to charitable causes. It's for the person that wants it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Underdogs, Bootstrappers, Game Changers. And you know I love it when I have a dear friend in the studio, my good friend Paloma today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming to help underdogs today. And you know, folks, I always try to choose guests and, a story for the day. And so today, we're actually going to talk about business startup stuff. Paloma happens to be a business attorney for how many years now?
This is my 9th year of practice.
9th year. And she's one of the most clever people I know. And that's why I love being able to, usually it would cost hundreds of dollars an hour to talk to Paloma, but then I put her in the studio here for today, and then you get her advice for free, which is amazing. So yeah, we're going to work on underdogs today and business startup. So let's talk about somebody out there in the world today. They want to start their business. Your advice for the very first step.
For the very first step, I would say you have to form the entity. At a minimum, right? You can have all the ideas in the world, but to have a full-fledged business, there are a lot of people out there that will run a business that's just a sole proprietorship, right? Through their personal name, through their personal social security number. And I think bare minimum, from a limited liability standpoint, you have to go and form an entity, and I always recommend an LLC for that purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, folks, you can obviously use your own social security number. You can go out there in the world and start your business and just run it under your own social security number. But there's a lot of reasons why you want to separate the entity. There's tax reasons, there's liability reasons. Let's go into liability for a second. So person A, let's say, just starts doing work under their social security number. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think if you were going to really break it down, right, somebody who's doing work, let's use a service-based industry. You're doing work as a service business and you screw something up. And maybe that results in the, customer or client having a loss of some kind. If you're working solely under your personal social and you're a sole proprietor, you don't have that LLC to protect you, then they could potentially come after your personal assets, right? So having that LLC in place really puts a buffer between you and your personal assets and your business assets, so that worst case scenario, if someone were to sue you or something were to go wrong and they were to pursue you for damages, all they can really pursue is your LLC assets. It creates that protectionary bubble around you.
Yeah, exactly. And then just to bolster your point there, it's like if you have a business and then let's say personally you own a house and somebody sues your business, you don't want to lose your house. You want to protect those assets.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then there's obviously some tax implication stuff, reasons behind an LLC. There's some reasons like potential like sale value at some point, and some other things that you want to think about when you're talking about business structure. Let's also talk about too, just so they know, theory around different types of structures. I'm with you. 9 times out of 10, especially small business folks, they're going to want an LLC. Let's talk about times that they would want to look a little bit further. So let's talk about like a corporation, for instance. When would they want to consider that in your opinion?
I think corporations are great when someone is thinking about taking on investments from corporate companies like a VC or private equity. A lot of them like to see more formalized structure within the entity. So they like to have that board. They like to have that separation between the shareholders and the decision makers, which you don't typically see a whole lot in an LLC. The people who are members are often always managers or play a role in the management of the company. And so I think a corporation is great when you need to have formalities between the people who are making the decisions day to day, separate from the people who are maybe the investors or the people who have ownership.
That's so well put.
Yeah.
And I want to, once again, like I always do, try to bolster that point too. It's like the cutoff, folks, a lot of ways is if you have a couple people involved in the company, and LLCs is probably the best way to go. If you're going to get a lot of outside investment, that's why tech companies and stuff like that, where they're fundraising a lot of money, technically usually start like as a corporation, because they're going to have a lot of uninvolved people like putting into the business. And there is a threshold on like what the LLC can bear for different investment groups too. So most of you small business folks, just like I am, it's like you're going to want an LLC, right? And then complexity of documentation and, that sort of stuff. It can be more cumbersome. I'm not going to say you dare have to have a lawyer when you have a corporation, but a lawyer and a CPA is going to be a really good team. I mean, it is anyways, but a lot of times bootstrappers aren't going to be able to afford those things. And so when you're jumping to a corporation, it's like you kind of want to be at the level where you're getting a lot of investment, so you have that necessity of it, and the obligations increase so that you usually want to have a better teammate. You want to say anything to like add to that I missed?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I think the formalities of it requires people to take meetings and minutes and resolutions and have these board approval processes that ultimately, someone who's starting up and a true bootstrapper, they're only probably going to be just, one or two people. And having that formality, most people are just going to skip right over it. So they're not going to have all the corporate documentation that they need to back up all the decisions they made. So why not just simplify it and do the LLC? And to your point, the LLC has so much flexibility in it. What I love as an attorney from my perspective about LLCs is that the operating agreement can be whatever you want. So yes, there is a statute in every state that will govern your LLC in the absence of an operating agreement. But the nice thing is, if you want to draft around the statute, you can. So yes, you kind of look at the statute and say, that's a default, right? That's what we have when we have no rules. But if you want to write your own rule book, the operating agreement is perfect. And that's what I love about the LLC. We always joked, like every state has their own LLC statute, and each state we joke as like attorneys will say like it's the LLC is like the Wild West of entity structures, because you really can do whatever you want with them.
And here's the thing, folks, if you don't define that, and like Paloma's saying, then it goes to default to the state. But you can have your own definitions of it. And if you've watched this show before, I call it operating in agreement. It's an operating agreement or an operating in agreement. Usually, you want to have one either as a solopreneur too. It's a good idea, right? It's like we've talked about this before. Let's say if you need a reason, and I like to give you reasons beyond just say it, do it because I said so. It's like if you need a reason why would it, Tyler, if it's operating in agreement, why would I need an operating agreement to agree with myself, right? But here's the thing, let's say you pass away. What family member gets to take over? What's the rule, for that? Do you want the state stealing your business from you? Because that can basically happen. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's like, if you don't have an operating agreement, then it makes it real gray who the business goes to if you pass.
I mean, it forces it through probate, which a lot of people don't realize that could create bungles. Like, let's say the business is really doing well, and then all of a sudden you pass away as an owner and there isn't that operating agreement to say, hey, my brother or sister is going to come in and either continue operating or wind it up. Probate takes a while. People don't realize that. So, the business ends up kind of in limbo, where you're waiting for the court to say, yes, this person can now go in and control the entity on your behalf, when you could have just had it in the operating agreement and there would have been no waiting period.
That easy. So hopefully that talks you into why you would need an operating agreement as a single individual. And then an operating agreement for a partnership is a necessity. It's the rule book, right? And I have a 50-sheet questionnaire that I'm working on getting to you guys. And it basically goes all through all these fundamental things, because it's like if you study enough partnerships are usually the downfall of the business. They can also be the most tremendous benefit. But like a simple example is, it's like, Well, what hour of a week were we going to both work? And what is considered a business expense and a personal expense, for instance? If your partner's going willy-nilly on every lunch out there in the world, that's probably going to frustrate you. So you probably want to put something in the operating agreement with like, these are the amount of hours we're both going to work. This is the rule around a lunch, like weigh in for me too. Like give me a couple other rules that we want to think about in the operating agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think division of profit and how much each partner is contributing, right? Because it can be lopsided oftentimes with one person being like the rainmaker, bringing in all the business, and maybe the other person is doing all the nitty gritty, right? They're the workhorse behind the scenes. And so you don't always, there are times when someone's not carrying their weight and there should be a division in the agreement, but then there's other times where someone is carrying their weight behind the scenes and maybe they're being written out of their fair share, right? It goes both ways.
And that's, you're saying right now, well, I'm starting it with my best friend. It's like you're saying that back, like, I don't need this agreement. And you're deadly wrong. It's like have a rule book to follow. Have something to go, remember when we talked about this? That's why I have the 50-sheet questionnaire too. By the way, I don't sell it, as you guys know. This isn't like a prep to sell you something. But it like gets those fundamental little things out. It's like, how many hours were you supposed to be working a week? When do you take vacations? What's the rule on that? Like, how much are you going to get paid? How much am I going to get paid? What's the idea around dividends? Like when are we going to have like dividends in the company? When are we going to reinvest in the company? It's all these fundamental factors. And like partnerships destroy or improve a business, like daily. There is so many case studies on like partnerships of successful companies that are actually what derail the company.
I think you make a good point about having partners can be absolutely the make or break, but I think people let their guard down when the partner is someone they care about or they love. And inherently, you cannot imagine a future where your mom or your sibling or your best friend and you hate each other because of your business. But I think that that's more common than people who go into business with people that they have less knowledge and less history with because they are nervous about what that future looks like, right? You don't inherently, you go into business with your parents and you're like, this is going to be great. We don't need to put all the parameters in there for what happens when things go wrong, right? And so I think that in and of itself should be a red flag for anybody going into business with someone that they're very close with, lifetime friends or family. That has to be considered when drafting an operating agreement.
And then if you love that person, it's even more of the reason to have it because it will destroy a relationship faster than anything I've ever seen. Like I've helped hundreds of business people, and a lot of times a partnership becomes, and it's usually a miscommunication of some sort. I thought you were going to X. And I thought you were going to Y. And inevitably in partnerships too, you see 9 times out of 10, it's very lopsided. One person's doing a lot more work than the other one. So just like have rules on if that like happens, And so, okay, we beat operating agreement with a dead horse. You have to have it, operating in agreement. It's basically a rule book, so that will confuse you anymore. We've talked about business structure. LLC is basically like, let me balance that out just a little bit too. I want you to think about almost a new person happening in the world when you open an LLC. An LLC gets something similar when you register with the IRS, and that's called an EIN, right? An EIN into the business, let's say it's a person, is like the Social Security number. That is what you're gonna use for doing taxes and things of that nature. And so that separation, you're almost creating a new person in the world, and a new person becomes that business. So that's what an LLC is, folks. And we've talked a little bit about why you wanna have it. Fairly simple to file. People pay $1,000 online. Please don't pay $1,000 online to do an LLC.
Don't use LegalZoom. You don't need to.
No. It's incredible. And so you can do it. I promise you. Get online, do the paperwork. If you want, consult an attorney, a couple $100 probably to get an attorney to do it. I don't like to quote people's rates by any means, but, don't pay $1,000 online. It's a very simple process. You can do it yourself. One of the things on there that confuses people constantly is member managed, manager managed, right? So let's talk about that really quick because they're going to see that, and that's where they're going to get stuck. I know because I've helped enough people with them. So let's talk about member managed.
Yeah, so I think the main difference, right, is member managed means that all the people who have ownership in the entity can make decisions together. Manager manage means that there's one or more people who may or may not have ownership that make day-to-day decisions. Now, don't get me wrong, there are things that should be included, like manager managed entities have to have parameters around what the manager makes decisions about. You don't want to just wholesale give the manager carte blanche to make important decisions. Common things that are carved out in the operating agreement for manager not being able to make decisions are, dissolution of the entity, changes to the operating agreement, transfer of ownership, things that are like big hit, ticket items. And if you don't have it in there, I think you run the risk of blurring the line of like, what can the manager do and not do? And if it's not written in there with some specificity, I think it's open for interpretation. And there could be some instances where a person who's a manager, but maybe not a member, gets away with too much power.
Yeah, agreed 100%. Most of you bootstrappers, most of you starting a business, you're going to be member managed LLCs and not manager managed LLCs. So that takes care of that bucket where most people get confused. The other one is stat agent. Let's talk about stat agent for a second, because that's what really confuses people. And you know what's funny is a lot of people think a stat agent's like a lawyer. It can be a lawyer. So, but I don't want to confuse you there. But a lot of people think when they have a stat agent, that's like some sort of like major business protection. Like I've been with, believe it or not, I don't know if you've heard this before, but a lot of people assume that it's like when you have a stat agent, it's like hiring a lawyer that's going to protect your business.
Oh no, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, like that is like people get it so lost on what it actually is.
That's funny.
And before we go too deep into that, I'm going to tell you right now, you can be the stat agent. Like when you get on some of these big online companies, they are literally going to scare you into this. And they're going to tell you, you need to pay us $200 a year. You need a stat agent. Are you sure you don't want a stat agent? And it's like, so my suggestion is if your company's big enough, you have a Paloma be their stat agent, right? You have your lawyer. That way, like, talk to me about what a stat agent actually does, and then I'll give like more of like my side on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you say that about people's misperceptions about what stat agents do, because ultimately it's really just something that's published on the state filing website, right? So in Arizona, that's the Arizona Corporation Commission. For a lot of other states, it's the Secretary of State. But it's always published online so that if anyone has beef with your company, they can have a designated person and place with a mailing address to send their complaint or letter or whatever it may be. And it's commonly most used in litigation senses, right?
Yeah.
So people are filing a complaint and it's a formal, they have to serve you the complaint and all of that. And the stat agent is usually what will receive process of that service. So there's, like you were saying, you can be your own stat agent, but the beef with it is that you have to have a physical address that someone can literally show up and hand you a document. It can't just be a UPS box.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where people get confused, because you can have a UPS box for your principal address if you really want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just basically a person that receives the documentation, folks.
Yeah.
And if you have a business location, that you're open and available, you can be the stat agent. You can save yourself a couple $100 a year. But the online companies love to scare you into it, and they love to tell you that you need this and you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you don't get it. You can be your own stat agent. That's the case in Blanc. But it's nice to have a lawyer be your stat agent, or somebody else that's going to be around the office constantly, right? And so that way, if you get served, because 9 times out of 10, that's what a stat agent's there for, is like you've gotten something to do with a legal thing, and that's the state saying, hey, we need to get a hold of you. Here's the paperwork because you're getting sued. And so it's nice if your lawyer accepts that stuff. So you can save some money at first, but then eventually if you want to get down the road, it's not a bad idea to have your lawyer take in.
Well, and I would say that I would almost say the market rate for if you wanted to hire an outside company, not even your attorney, you just wanted to use a third party, $50 is kind of the average that I see. It might go up now. I feel like inflation every year like increases slightly, but the companies that are charging a couple $100, that's above market. So there's no reason, if you do want to hire a third party and it not be an attorney, $50 is pretty much the going rate. And if you dig around enough, you should be able to find one that has that as its
You're
rate.
talking $50 for the year?
For the year, yeah.
And so like $50 for the year, it's a no-brainer probably, folks. It's like that way you keep yourself out of trouble. I'll tell a quick story around that. here's the thing, the online companies will now give away free LLC, right? And it's mostly so they can sell you this for hundreds of dollars. The other thing is too, it is absolutely free to dissolve an LLC. I ran across a couple recently that when they contacted one of these online entities and say, hey, we never use the LLC, we want to dissolve it. They said, okay, great, $1,400.
That's insane.
Yeah. So be careful what's free and why they're doing
Yeah.
it. They're making their money on the stat agent. They're making money. They're counting on, unfortunately, folks, a lot of people set up LLCs and they never use them, right? Greatest intention, never uses it. And by the way, if you're not going to use it, close it down, right? You don't want all the implications of that. But like, you don't need to pay $1,400 to dissolve it.
No, that is insane. And I think that, to your point, if you're utilizing a third party to, say, form your entity, you don't have control over the online filing process. So setting aside the desire to terminate an LLC that you're not using, what if you add a partner or a partner leaves or you need to change the principal address of your business or the statutory agent needs to change? Granted, if you're using a third party, they might be your statutory agent, and so it's easy to just say, hey, charge me X and change your, stat agent address or whatever. But if you don't have control over your filing with the state, you inherently have to always go back to the third party and pay them essentially ransom money to make changes to your LLC. It's silly and it's unnecessary.
That's why it's dangerous. They're like, here's a free LLC. It's not free, folks. They're after the other stuff. And what frustrates me about that is that's immoral and unethical to me, because they've acted like something's a free service and really it's just to trick you into buying a bunch of other BS from them. And so be careful with that. It's so easy to do, folks. And if you put something on the paperwork wrong originally, they'll kick it back to you and tell you how to correct it, right? They'll tell you what you did wrong. It's like, I guess that's what's nice about what we have here. It's like you can come in anytime and we help you file an LLC for free. 100% for free. We help you, I'll print the paperwork for you. I'll point you in the right direction. I have to make sure you file it yourself. I don't do that part for you, but that's how easy it is. And everybody, when they look at it, they're like, I'm surprised it's that easy. But in the same token, too, the Arizona Corporation Commission, who I wish you would listen to me, they make it a little bit more complex than it ever should be. It's like, oh, I need document, and I usually remember the name of the document off the top of my head. You need this document because you're doing this, and you're going to be on your own stat agent, so then you're doing this document. So putting the 3 documents together is probably the hardest part. So usually when people come in here, we just lay out all 3 of those documents and here you go. And so so we've talked about LLCs, really important in business structure. Please do that. Although, and something I want to mention here too is there is no magic trick to an LLC. I see these things online. I don't know if you've seen them, where it's open 6 LLCs and somehow that becomes a $1 billion business. No, folks, it's literally just an entity to hold your money that you potentially do or don't make. It's or do business through is a better way to say. There is no secret method to why an LLC will just make you money arbitrarily.
No. And I mean, if you scroll through any social media now, I feel like the get rich quick schemes are endless, right? I see a lot of people come to me with, especially in Arizona, investment properties, and they want to move those investment properties into LLCs, right? Because they've saw something online or they read a blog post that says you don't have your Airbnb home in an LLC. Yeah. And while there's truth to that, there's also a lot of limitations to how and when you can do that. And so I feel like, you and I are both probably battling on the regular these misconceptions that are getting downloaded off the internet, and people just think, I've got all these Airbnbs, I'm just going to throw them into an LLC and abracadabra, all of my problems are solved.
It's so crazy to me. And the other thing, folks, is there is obligations to having an LLC, and there's tax implications and things like that. In every way, it's a good idea, but it's not a magic trick either. It's and it's good for, protections and tax strategy and that sort of stuff, but it's no magic trick at the end of the day. So that's LLCs, that's operating agreements. Hopefully we've kind of disillusioned those things for you. The other thing before they start, and it's a mistake that I've made in the past, is trademark search. So if you're going, I love the name, help me get a name, Paloma. We're starting a landscaping company today. So let's develop a name for a landscaping company.
I'm sure it's taken. Green Acres.
Green Acres Landscaping. So here is, and I'm not telling you how to break the rules, like this is my disclosure statement, it's like, but if Green Acres never does more than like $10 in business, chances are real Green Acres is never going to come after you. I'm not going to say that for sure because they might, it's like, but you want to also plan for your success. That's something we also don't do quite often when we're starting businesses because we're being afraid. We don't know what we're doing. We don't think like, we're just going to open this small landscaping company. We don't ever think about what the pie in the sky dream for it could be, right? And so Green Acres, we look at it, right? And we want that as in like, we're just going to open that business. But here's the stop gate. You go. Like, what do I need to do to look at if I should take Green Acres on as my name or not?
I mean, zero cost items that you can do to make sure that Green Acres is a good name.
Yeah.
Google it.
Yep.
Right? At a bare minimum, Google it to see who's in your area. Yep. I would also just Google some other states in the surrounding areas.
Agreed.
To see if there's other states that might have a claim to that name.
Yep.
You can do a free search on the USPTO, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office.
Yep.
And do a search for the name, see if the logo is taken on a separate basis. I mean, I think in today's world, what matters most is not just the name and the URL. People forget that you're going to also want all the social names, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you get the URL and you're like, yes,
Yep.
greenacreslandscaping.com is available. I'm
Yep.
sure it's not. And then you go on like Instagram and it's gone, and you go on TikTok and it's gone. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you see, and you'll see this from time to time, you'll see people who are influencers didn't think far enough ahead.
Yep.
Every single social is a different variation.
Yeah.
And then it's hard because how do people, okay, you have to remember Instagram is Green Acres Landscaping 1,
Yeah.
or like the real Green Acres Landscaping or whatever. And so I think the easier it is for people to find you, the better it is, right? So you want to pick something that you can literally gobble up all of the potential visible things that are online to have unanimous like similarity across the board.
We started like this in after I had a couple businesses, so I knew this, like we still make mistakes even as like business people progressed, but went out there, we decided to open a chain of custom mattress stores. Basically, like we had a factory and like building your sandwich. You could come in, fill out a sheet of paper, try out this like bed that we could cobble together for you, and then you could order it just like ordering a sandwich. I want the memory foam. I want the pillow top, that sort of stuff.
Swiss
and then
cheese.
we would have that bed built for you and shipped to you, right? And so we created this name that we loved, put a lot of money into the website, put a lot of money into like, people don't realize it's like a sign for your store is ridiculously expensive. Like those signs are expensive. Like all the branding was expensive. All the time and effort were expensive. Open the doors, cease and desist, right? From a pillow company, not a mattress company, right? But close enough in a trademark infringement, we had no choice but to scrap everything, And so do the research here too. And I want to bolster some of your points too. It's like, a name's a hard thing and you should think about it. And you should look at my episode that I talked to Brain Glue, James Bond, like incredible thoughts on marketing around names, but names hard,
Yeah.
But if you think about it, it's marketing gold. See the episode. But at the same point, I will give up the name I like for the domain a lot of times if I can have a better domain, if I can have better social handles. I've seen it over and over again. Somebody becomes an influencer like you're saying. I've seen a podcast recently, actually. The lady had this name. She never looked at any of this stuff, and then like she got successful. And that's the thing. They won't hit you usually immediately like they did with our business. They'll usually hit you when it hurts, where you've had a lot of success with it. And it's like, hey, you're not doing anything with this anymore, and they might even hit you with a lawsuit on that, right? So, like look into that stuff because even a pillow company can be a trademark infringement versus a mattress company. So you have to be kind of like cognizant of that stuff and do the time around the domain, the social media handles. Like these are important things. Planning your business's success, right? And so, so I think it's very viable to look into that stuff. When you're looking at the USPTO, did I say it right?
Yeah.
I always say it wrong. So you'll see that there's going to be the name Green Acres, but there could be a Green Acre hair care. There could be a Green Acre give me one, television company, it's like, so is that a trademark infringement? And that's where it gets gray. That's when you start talking about like filings, attorney talk, trademark discussions, things of that nature. So folks, but bare minimum, to do your diligence, you can go take a peek. And if you have agreed anchors that's somewhere in the realm of lawn care, it might be a little bit dangerous to seek it, right? I'm not going to say ever, like, would you say, I wouldn't say ever it's like a direct no, unless it is a direct landscaping company, but it's like, it gets a little bit more tricky, right? And if you're not going to spend the money in that moment, it's probably not one that I would risk. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The part that's complicated about protecting your branding is that there's the federal level, which is the USPTO.
Yeah.
Then there's the state level, which
Yep.
you can, register your trade name with the state.
Yeah.
And then each state has limitations on LLC names. So let's say you have an LLC name and it's good to go here, but then you expand into New Mexico and it's not there. They have someone with that same name. You would ultimately have to, most likely, if you wanted to continue to do business in New Mexico, file a DBA so that you weren't super similar.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't necessarily allow you to file the same name as a foreign registered business. Obviously, each state is different, but I think it gets, depending on what your long-term goals are, and to your point, sometimes you're not thinking big enough, right? You're just starting out. The thought of being a multi-state business is so far off in the future that you're like, that's something that my future self can worry about.
Yep.
When in reality, everyone should be planning for inevitable success, because ultimately when that day comes, what's to say that you have a plan when you decide to expand into another state and you run into these issues with branding or similar names?
Yeah.
I almost think there's a similarity there for planning. People don't talk much about getting process and systems in place early on, right? You launch a business.
Yep.
Even for myself, launching my own practice, when things are slow, you're focused on marketing. You're focused on getting the word out that you exist, getting new clients, new customers, building what generates you revenue, right? Because that's your sole metric that you're worried about when you start a new business. You're like, how do I make money?
Yeah.
And then once you start making money, things get busy. And I think people really underestimate, and myself included, that once you start getting busy, the time that you would normally have been able to spend getting your, for lack of a better word, shit together, you don't have it anymore. And so now you're trying to fit in, an hour here, an hour there, working on things that you could have been working on all along from the get-go. So I think what my personal advice, that's not really legal in nature, to startups and small businesses is, when things are slow, absolutely you still have to focus on the marketing and the money, revenue generating tasks, but carve out time every single week or every single day, depending on how you want to work on it, and start figuring out what your business is going to look like when it's busy, right?
Thank you.
Work on your CRM in advance.
Yep.
Get your systems in place, work on automations, work on all these things that you're not going to have time for when you have success.
And then like, it's such a double-edged sword for me, because like with bootstrappers, like I want you to have the bare minimum in like startup costs, and like looking at a trademark is just another one of those things that's going to cost you some money up front. But I also want you to think about it in your success this way too. It's like, imagine everything, I put a piggy bank over here, right? And then every time I have a customer interaction that's positive, let's say I put a coin in that piggy bank, right? And like, let's say I have a piece of marketing content I put out on social media, I put another coin. What I'm saying is you're building value in your brand. Every discussion you have, every social media post, every time you build your website. But here's the thing, if you don't have that trademark, technically that piggy bank is something you're putting money into that could be taken, And then like, here's the thing too, it's like, let's say you get down the road, you do an amazing job putting money in this piggy bank, and then somebody comes along and they're after the trademark, they're coming up behind you, and maybe they're even nefarious, they're seeing how well you're doing and like, oh, Joe Smo doesn't have that trademark. Now you are in, like, it gets into legal territory there, like from my seat, and I'm not a lawyer, folks, from my seat, I do think you have some precedence there, being in business for a long enough time, but still, it's not a fight you want to fight, right?
No, I mean, there are instances I've seen in my practice over the years where people don't register.
Yep.
Someone registers, not even nefariously, right?
Yeah.
That nefariousness does exist out
Sure.
there. But there's another business, similar idea, goes out, registers the name, and then all of a sudden you're stuck trying to challenge them.
Yep.
There is a window on the USPTO where they'll publish it as a sort of a pre-publish as a
Yep.
way to kind of describe it,
Yep.
where you have a window to challenge, as like you were saying, a pre-existing business that's been around that has first dibs, right? And that window closes.
Yeah.
So in some ways, the scammers of the world can sometimes be helpful in that they're out there data mining
They
for,
are.
you know,
You'll get 100 calls a day.
you
on
know,
this.
and so like you might get a letter and
Yeah.
it's and the scammer might say, you know, hey, we saw somebody is like, you know,
Registering
registering your mark.
Yeah.
And 50% of the time, maybe more, it's not true. And you can go on and you can search and
Yep.
you can disprove that that's happening.
Yep.
But there's also that like 20 to 10% where they send you a letter and they're right, and you have a time frame to challenge it, and you're like, thank you, scammer, for letting me know. Don't hire them because, you know, who knows where that letter came
Yeah.
from.
Please be careful with that.
But at least you now have been told that you are in this challenge window and you can do something about it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or like I always tell clients that are trying to run their business, bootstrapping it, trying to do it on like the lowest cost possible as they're growing organically and reinvesting smartly. I think that you can always, if you know what you're going to register, just pop on.
Yeah.
Pop on every month, just check, make sure no one's out there registering it, right?
Yeah.
And that way you have peace of mind that it's still available without spending the money when you're not ready to.
Yeah.
And worst case scenario, you pop on, let's say it's been 6 months, you pop on the 6th month and you see someone has registered. Now you're like, okay, it's time to spend that money because it's important to my business and my brand.
That every time you're putting, you know, an email out, you know, a website out, that sort of stuff, you're building value in that brand. And so make sure you pay attention to protecting that. Like this, whether you know this or not as new business people, if you've joined this, it's like, this is super valuable stuff. It took me years to understand what this stuff is, right? And I'm sure you see people make mistakes in it every single day.
I mean, I think it's hard because hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, you can always pivot, but does the pivot hurt? I mean, here's a good example for me personally. I have no intention at this time to use an Instagram name that I used to have.
Yeah.
Used to have one. It was for personal use. I sat on it for a while, decided ultimately I just didn't want to use it anymore, and I switched it to something else.
Yeah.
And after that, I actually found that the URL, and it's my name. So I like got the URL and I'm sitting on that URL because maybe at some point in the future I'll use it.
Yeah.
And I went back to steal back my Instagram handle and it was gone.
Somebody took it.
And it's a real person. They're
Yeah.
posting, you know, pictures of their life. But I
Yeah.
was like, like I should have kept it. Like it was one of those weird spur of the moment decisions where I had this idea about like doing a travel blog and I switched my personal to the name of that travel blog that I was gonna start but never did.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, at some point I'm sure I could probably write, you know, the girl and be like, hi, you know, what, name your price probably, but.
You know, like, the thing is too, it's like if you don't get those names and stuff, like people will approach, they'll go out and buy them because they know you would want that.
Yes,
and then
yeah.
they'll charge a premium on it, you know, and it's like, I gave myself a hard time for making the mistake, having already had businesses before in the mattress business. But like a well-known story is Facebook made the same mistake. When they transitioned over to
that,
Meta,
yeah.
they didn't double check either. You know, it's like, I learned that lesson a long time ago now, you know, but it's like even one of the biggest companies in the world has made that mistake. And my understanding is they had to pay millions for the name Meta. And so it's another reason, it's like, look at the Meta folks that were out there. Genius move in making sure they were protected, because look how much money it amounted to, probably more than their company had ever made. I don't remember what the company was.
No, absolutely. I think one other piece of that is that, let's say you start a business and let's be real, the stats on people who build a new business into something that's truly successful, that lasts for a long time, it's not great, right? It's hard.
Like 80-90%
yeah,
failure.
it's really hard. You have a high failure rate. And so not to be sort of like the, rain cloud in the room, but if you start a business and you have a really great name and then you close up shop because maybe it's not doing well, I always warn people, don't just give up all of your branding or all of your names. Maybe you'll reuse them, right? Like look at what happened with the Instagram handle that I had. It's gone. And inevitably, maybe the things that you have like Meta could be worth something down the road where you get paid out because you were sitting on it. I had someone come to me. They were, I want to call them like a plant shop, but they specialized in like cacti and succulents and things like that. And ultimately, I didn't work with them directly. It was someone that was working with them that was a web designer. And they said, just out of curiosity, what are your thoughts on, they're retiring, they want to sell the business, but they don't know the value.
Yeah.
And the value of the business was actually pretty nominal because the plant shop was all virtual for the most part. They had over time shut down the plant store that they had physically, like the nursery, right?
Yeah.
So all of their nursery stuff was actually only open for them cultivating. And then they were shipping cacti all over the country and across the world. And it was interesting to see how much revenue was being generated based on just the story that this web developer was telling me about. From selling cacti all over the world. It just
crazy.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
But these people had the URL, and I'm sure they still have it, or I hope they do at this point because I wasn't able to talk with them, is cactus.com.
That's such a good point, because sometimes you have something as simple as that and there's a tremendous amount of value to it.
So much value.
Yeah. People don't think about that stuff enough. I've walked into a lot of businesses to help the people, and there's a lot of businesses where people are like, Tyler, my business is worth nothing. And it's like, that's almost never true. Your business is almost always worth something.
Yeah.
And it could be the value in the domain name. It could be the value in your client list. It could be the value in your inventory. There's always some sort of value there. So I would implore you out there, if you're like over it or whatever, to at least, like Paloma's saying, maybe hang on to the domain name, or like do a little investigating, call a broker or something like that and ask them about like what you could actually do with that business instead of just closing it up and walking away. So, but like all the things we've talked about today will help you with that, right? Having a, like if it comes to Paloma's specialty too is mergers and acquisition stuff, and so it's like when it comes to that sale point or that acquisition or that merger, it's like, how important is it to have all these ducks lined in a row that we've set up so far?
No, I mean, it's imperative. And I think a lot of people start businesses without the end in mind.
Yeah.
And there are ways to structure your startup to be exit friendly, right? And so just like we talked about with the idea of thinking bigger, thinking about your success in a different way, right?
It's so hard at first, folks, but please have the pie in the sky vision.
Yes. Dream bigger, think about the complexities that you will face when things are really rolling, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways that you can have as a startup is that when you sign contracts with your vendors or with your, let's say, your lease, like anything that's a big contract, that's even with your clients or customers, there's language that you can put into those contracts that make it easier for you to change ownership later on. And you see it quite frequently in the SaaS industries where people are maybe collecting data. They're not necessarily selling the data, but if you don't inherently have language in your documents that data can be transferred on sale, where's some of the value that you have from your SaaS company, right? So I think there are ways to plan and prepare that might seem foolish, just like this, thinking about what happens when you have 6 employees and you've got all these complexities that you wouldn't have ever dreamed about when it was just you in a garage somewhere, right? So I think that there are ways to plan for future exit that should be baked in from day one.
And a lot of it's easy. It's kind of like, I mean, how excited is somebody to get into their new business or their new, building or whatever? And they'll kind of like, they'll sign whatever, to get that done because they're so excited about it. So like when you're in that whatever phase, like of excitement phase, like do those things smart, like enter into leases smart, analyze the lease for your success. Don't just get so excited about it, enter into contract smart. And the other thing I want to implore you to is like your clients for the most part are going to have no problem signing a contract when they're excited. You've just sold them whatever X is. And the amount of valuation that increases your business, when you have those secure contracts, like talk about that for a second too. Like fundamentally laying out proper paperwork like we're talking about, and then like how that values when somebody goes to sell their business.
I think inherently, right? People want to be able to say this business has, let's say the business on paper is worth $1 million.
Yep.
How do you make sure that valuation is accurate?
Yep.
You see a lot of businesses that do handshake deals, or things are sort of rudimentary in terms of paperwork, or maybe it's an invoice instead of an actual contract. Buyers don't want that. Buyers want to have this, here's a full list of all of our customers, clients, vendors, all of our important contracts. Here it is, all on paper, to verify that everything we're telling you financially is true and accurate, and people can't just walk away tomorrow.
You know what's so funny too is like, you won't believe this, but I've seen this multiple times in business. Clients will get excited when you hand them a proposal or a contract, because then it like shows that you've got your stuff together, right? It's a little bit leery. You're out there saying that like, whoa, Tyler, it's going to be hard for them to sign the contract. No, it's not. They actually prefer it, because if you go up and just shake their hand and say, yeah, like they'll tell you all the things. I mean, here's a good example maybe. You ever worry, and don't get me wrong, there's some genius waiters out there, but do you ever worry when the waiter never puts anything down on the piece of paper? You know what I mean? That's what your client's doing. You might be a genius and you might be able to remember the order per beta, but they would much rather have you have a scope of work and sign off onto it. And that will save you so many heartaches,
Well, and I like your analogy, because we worry about it because we've had so many waiters not write it down and get it wrong.
Yeah, sure.
So same concept, right? When it's not written down and you're doing business with someone, you start to have doubts about, well, are we really on the same page? And am I going to get what I've bargained for? I think you made a really solid point, which is that it's interesting. There are a lot of small business owners that worry about having people sign contracts, and they're intimidated by this idea that they're going to have people read something that's maybe more than one page, and
or they're going to say no because of it, or
they'll turn down the work or whatever it is. And I can tell you with certainty that's just not true. And if you're worried about having a contract that's intimidating, there are ways to structure it to make it sound more natural, to have it be more humanized, that it's less intimidating, right? You don't have to have all of the legalese in there. There's ways to format it. I mean, I've taken, in businesses where people are worried about this as a key function, or they've had people look at it and say, I really don't want to read this. We've taken that contract and simplified it to the point where people can't really claim that they don't understand it anymore.
Yeah.
And it went over really well. It still has all the protections. Granted, I have to tell people, hey, if we need 3 pages, 3 pages is it, right?
And I've been in business now for about 15 years, 15 years, and had contracts in my businesses, and I can think of one time in all of history that somebody balked at the contract. And, I'll actually tell the story really quick, but, it's like somebody came in, refused to sign the contract, and so starts screaming at the receptionist, who's being really polite, just asking him to go over the scope of work and give a signature. And he's like, I'm out of time. I can't do this. It's like, and so I went in and I said, hey, you need to sign the contract. And he's like, I'm not going to sign the contract. I'm dropping off, and I should have been out of here moments ago or whatever. And I said, well, I'm sorry, we'll be turning down your work today. And he said, you're going to turn down thousands and thousands of dollars. And I was like, yes, we are. And here's the thing, folks. A person that will not sign your contract and is already being rude to the receptionist, not only do you have the brain, your employees are so important that they have, a good mindset. And that is going to mess them up for the day. especially if you're not helping them, right? You know, like that is so important. If your employees are in a good mood, they'll treat your customers well, your business will do well. And I can tell you right now, that was the best stopgate ever. You know, that guy not wanting to do the paperwork was a beautiful gift, because guess what? The second I sign on to doing that work now, that guy's my problem, right? And when he wants to be every bit of a jerk with the work, you know, which I promise you is going to happen, you'll wish a million times you didn't have that guy, you know, as a client. And so like, it's another stopgate. If they're not willing to sign your paperwork and be a reasonable human and show that like, hey, we list things out here so we don't get, this is a customer service too, to do paperwork. We're not just trying to remember your order, you know, we're showing you what it is. You know, it's like, that's a client you don't need. There are certain clients in the world, folks, that you're better off letting them go down the street. And if you have things like your paperwork that's going to stop somebody, if they're being a prick about the paperwork, they're going to be a prick about the work. But then the thing is, you own them now the second you do their work. They can sue you. Another reason to have your LLC,
yes,
you know, you allow that guy didn't sign your paperwork, something goes on, he says you should have done so-and-so, you know, now they're suing you, but at least they'll sue your LLC and won't take your house. That's a culmination of our entire discussion so far.
No, I could not agree more. I mean, it's hard. I think to parlay off of what you were saying, when you're starting out and you're desperate to bring revenue into your business, it is so easy to turn a blind eye to that little feeling in your gut that says, this guy isn't right, or this person is just being over the top, or, you know, can't please them any which way, right? So I implore you, as much as it seems like the wrong decision to turn down revenue, and in most cases, like you said, like, you know, they're going to throw it in your face and maybe make you doubt it. Yeah. There's red flags in relationships. There's red flags in customer and client relationships.
It's the hardest thing. And, you know, like, it's funny that to me, it's like everybody in business is like, oh, my really rich client with all this money, you know, and things like that. And that's what everybody wants, is the really rich client, you know. It's like, but if you get the really rich miser client, this is the worst customer to have ever. They're going to nickel and dime you. They're used to doing this in life, getting things for nothing, you know? And what's funny to me is you'll avoid your middle class client, and that's the one that's out there sending 7 people in the door. It's like, don't get caught up in the rich miser client. Let them go down the street. I'm serious. And I'm not saying all rich people are like that, but I'm saying you'll know the ones, right? You know, the nickel and dime, the Scrooge client. There are those Scrooge clients, and they're after you for getting everything free. You'll see them because they're yelling at the hotel clerk to get a free room. They just came up with something arbitrarily, like the banana was unripe in their room, you know, like they need a free room. They'll do this to your business too, I promise you. And what's funny about this is you're avoiding those beautiful people that are sending 10 people in their door that maybe aren't as rich as that client. It's funny, the psychology of business that way.
No, absolutely. And I'll play a little devil's advocate in that the contract that you have your customers or clients sign is what protects you when you don't have the red flag at the outset of the relationship. And maybe it's, you know, a wolf in disguise, and that person ends up being a terrible individual to work with. That contract is really what will protect you from, you know, deliverables that you never agreed to, right? All of a sudden they're like, hey, you were supposed to do X, Y, or Z. And you're like, I never agreed to any of that. That wasn't part of our pricing. That wasn't something we agreed to do. I think an easy, you know, example, and it's not universal, but for people who do web design or something that's creative, like people who do paintings or something like that, having a contract, even if it's short, that says you get X number of changes before I start billing you for changes, because inherently it's creative in nature. So what you think looks great, they may not think looks great. Well,
and then you can under-promise, over-deliver too. So let's say you will do more changes than that. Now you look like a hero. And I try to get people to understand that all the time. I'm going to make this story really quick to bolster this point as well. So I was at the Olive Garden, and I was having a meal there, and I got the tour of Italy, right? And then I wanted chicken on the fettuccine Alfredo. And the very nice guy said, hey, you know, like that's going to be an upcharge because it's not generally included. It's like totally intuitive to me, right? I realize I'm going to have to pay more for the chicken. But what's interesting is, like, now let's say the landscaper, right? And this happens all the time in small business. You have a scope of work, you go out to do said scope of work, and the client happens to go, hey, why don't you trim that bush on your way out the door? And the second that bush ends up on their invoice, all of a sudden they got a problem with it. And that's what's so interesting. That's why you want a scope of work and paperwork, because the second they make those change orders, to the scope of work, you need to be adding on. And what's funny to me is it's so intuitive to us at Olive Garden, in a big business that like, I'm going to be charged extra for chicken, but why is it never intuitive in the small business world? It's like, hey, you just asked for 45 changes. That costs money. You just asked for a new bush or a tree. That costs money. You asked for a new wall. Like, hey, why don't you just do this on your way out the door? Is extra money. So have changeovers, have scopes of work, and so that actually, like, folks, whether you believe it or not, maybe we're having a little bit of a paperwork, like legal discussion, but at the same time, like, I wish I could give you my brain for a minute and Paloma's and like show you how many pitfalls that you can avoid. Like, business is stressful enough. If you'll do some of the stuff we're talking about today, having these predictions, like, you'll be like, man, I'm glad I had that. I'm glad I separated my LC. Oh man, I'm so glad, I did stuff with my trademark. It's like, because look at what my business grew to be. Man, now I have this scope of paperwork, and now like this guy sued me because I didn't do something, but now I have the magic ticket. It's like that stuff, believe it or not, folks, is so invaluable.
I think your Olive Garden story actually hits home almost like a complimentary point, which is that it's easy, right? Like you said, in small business, to get lost in this fact that like when you ask for more, it's not just freebies. Yeah. It's stuff that, if your time is by the hour and someone asks for more, it should inherently increase the overall bill. But what you were saying is like, okay, you want chicken on the fettuccine, and the guy's like, that's going to be an upcharge, and you approve it. That, I think, right there is one of the other lessons that can be taken from your story, which is that if someone asks you to do more,
totally,
don't just do it and assume that they're on the same page, that the invoice is inherently going to be increased by whatever the rate is that you discussed.
Yeah.
Be upfront and say, hey, I'm happy to trim the bush on the way out, but I trim bushes at, $20 a bush. Yeah. So are you okay with the $20 added to the invoice? And they get to say yes or no, right? And if they inherently never wanted to pay for it, they're probably going to say no, and that's okay.
You're so right, and that's why a change order official document around those like lines is like imperative, because you're right. It should be a double agreement there, right? You shouldn't be obligated to something that is going to cost more money, but also they shouldn't be obligated to something they didn't know was going to be charged more for.
Yeah.
So, and like, believe it or not, folks, that sounds so simplistic to some of you, but it's like, it's a big deal. I've seen it, in businesses over and over again. You've probably worked in legal matters that are something as silly as that over and over again. It is so nice. How nice is it when you have the, like, what do I want to say, like the smoking gun, like, to help you with like a case?
Oh, I mean, it's wonderful, right? I think it's, I'll use an example. I was working with a business that had their sole sort of purpose was to provide kitchen equipment to various restaurants. Mm-hmm. And they were working off of invoices.
Yeah.
And they had a sort of language in there that was loosey-goosey around maintenance. Mm-hmm. And, this is sort of an area where you look at it and you say, if only the language said X, or if only it was a little more clear about what your obligations were, because inherently there were restaurants that were failing to do their maintenance. And so the equipment would break down.
Sure.
And part of the contract was when there was a repair or a breakdown, they would come out and they would service it. Yeah. Well, it ended up becoming this never-ending service situation where the machines weren't faulty. It was that they weren't doing the required maintenance, which was creating all these breakdowns. And so I think it's a good example of how, if the contract had just been a little bit clearer to say, hey, we're going to give you this workbook or this download or however you're going to give the information to that customer that says, you need to do X, Y, or Z to maintain this equipment. And if you fail to do that, and we come out and we do maintenance and find out it's because you haven't done the maintenance, we have the opportunity to take our machines back. Because at some point, this is just costing us money and you're not doing your fair share, right? But the contract didn't say that. So I feel like the overarching theme is anything that you would expect from your client or customer needs to be outlined, but then vice versa, you're going to outline all the responsibilities that you've agreed to take over. And when you have the two really well put, when things happen, like failure to maintain equipment, you go then point to the contract and say, hey, section 7.6 says you failed to maintain, and we've been here multiple times, and turns out, the ice cream machine isn't working because you haven't cleaned it ever, and we've decided we're going to end our contract with you,
Like, I'm going to bolster this point again because I think it's so valid. And then you have the option to be the hero. It's like, otherwise, if you just go out there, fix the ice cream machine, they'll think that was just part of what you do, and it wasn't part of what you do. You were going above and beyond. So if you have that in your contract and you go, hey, you didn't maintenance the ice cream machine, we're going to fix it anyways. Now you're a hero. Right? That's another reason to have it in there, because even if you are going to do it, then you can be heroic or you can just be the bare minimum, and that's another way to get really good customer loyalty is having that documentation that like, hey, we don't fix this stuff, but guess what? This time we're going to fix it for you, but next time you need to maintain the equipment, or you can hold them to the line. I'm sorry, like here's the document, you signed it, whichever your strategy is in business, and so it can be such a good customer service tool too.
Absolutely.
It's an under promise over deliver thing, and that's one of my key components in business is experience, or the customer experience. What are they going through? But this is part of it, right? Having good paperwork, believe it or not, is a good customer experience. And so we kind of started out in LLCs and we talked about operating agreements, which are super important, operating in agreement, folks. And then we talked about trademarks. We talked about paperwork, fundamental first aspects with your first couple months of business. What did we miss? I should know because I wrote 21 steps to starting a business, but I don't look at them every day, and so, and we talked about domains and we talked about names. I think that's fundamental first aspect of what I want people to be thinking about, like when they first start this stuff out. I mean, then we could get off and like, we'll have to bring you back and we'll talk about employment contracts and like the next level stuff per se.
Yeah.
Because this in my mind is level one, right? And then we go to a next level, which folks, that's the hardest level is the next one. It's like when you start dealing with employees growth, that's when you actually have something, it's like I was talking to a friend the other day and they're like, if you have success to a certain amount, plan on being sued. Like, it's just going to happen. It's like you get enough employees, you get enough going on with the name in your business, it's going to happen. No matter what kind of human being you are, some people out there will be sued a lot more because they're awful creatures, but like good people too get sued.
Absolutely. No, I think I could not agree more with the idea that like stage one seems like a lot and it seems over like just there's so many steps. It's cumbersome. People seemed overwhelmed, right? But stage two, whole nother ball game. Yeah. And only when you're at stage two can you look back at stage one and be like, well, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. The paperwork hoops and stuff like that after you get, that's why it's like one of my passions to make that part easier, right? And to help people with the pitfalls and to help them with the nefarious online sources that are charging all kinds of money. The average business start cost, do you know what it is?
No.
$4,000. That's it. There is not a better way on the planet. I don't care what investment you're talking about. I don't care what property purchase you're talking about. There is no better investment in the planet than a small business. And the 90% failure rate, I'm telling you right now from helping thousands of people, it's mostly because they choose the wrong dream and they quit. And choosing the wrong dream made them quit, right? So, and then like, that's why I like making this stuff easier. It's like, choose the right dream, choose the right business, do some fundamental pre-work, do these simple things that we're talking about for protections and like peace of mind and that sort of stuff. You will get to the next step. I can almost guarantee it. If they do this like pre-work, and I've actually, folks, I'm working, I don't know if you know that I'm working on this. I have developed a smaller version of the business plan that actually outputs if your business should be proceeded on or not.
Oh, nice.
In its current form. It's basically a check and balance system based on I know my folks out there, I would love you to write an 85-page business plan, but I know you're not going to do it. So I have a 1-page worksheet that you fill in. If it doesn't check out at the bottom, you got to go revamp something. I like boast this, but I believe I can save the business failure rate by at least 50% if they'd fill out this sheet before starting the business.
Nice.
And now if we add on these fundamental aspects that we talked about today that a lot of people, have pitfalls in, like success rate keeps going up, right? There is things that you can do to be more ready to have success in business.
Well, I think the business plan in some ways is a goal in writing down, or an exercise on writing down your goals.
Totally.
So, and people look at it like this weird homework assignment where you're writing stuff down that you're like, I already have it in my mind. But how many times have we learned through, all of the influencers, all of the scientists, all of the people that, talk about goal setting, that you have to write it down?
I believe absolutely it helps you analyze the pitfalls. And then like the big mistake people make with it is like they do it now for investors. Don't do it for the fucking investors. Do it for yourself. And then when you happen to get to use it for the investors, for your pitch deck or whatever, then great. But do it for your own analysis. I say the same thing about your books. People will only, especially at first, do the books for the IRS. Don't do the books for the fucking IRS. Do the books for you. And then you happen to be able to make it easier to pay the IRS, right? It's like those tools are for you, and then like you happen to be able to, the bonus is you happen to be able to use them for what you're supposed to use them for, right? Or could use them for, it's like.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of the things you're talking about, you can be used for metrics.
Yeah.
KPIs. Everybody talks about KPIs now. And like, what does a KPI even stand for? I know what it means.
Yeah.
Key performance indicators,
yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What's crazy to me is that even, KPIs is like this corporate lingo that got dribbled down from these giant
People
companies.
Love it. Yeah.
But like, it's true. KPIs can be stuff that's not even, you're not tracking it in the traditional sense. Let's say, a good example is when I was in law school, I actually took a class that was about starting your own law firm because it was something that always interested me.
Yeah.
And part of our homework for that class was to write a business plan, and it was the long kind, the kind that was laborious and like you hated it.
Oh, Glabe's 85 pages.
Yeah, so and I did it because it was part of our class.
Yeah.
But what's incredible is like a year ago, I found it in all of my paperwork, and I hadn't read it since then.
Yeah.
And I was reading through it, and I was thinking to myself, somewhere my subconscious must have stored a whole bunch of the stuff that I wrote in there because I literally have been following my own business plan to a T.
It's important. It's an exercise, really, is what it should be. But like I said, most people do it now. 99% of people do it for other people. They do it because they're trying to raise investment or because their grandpa told them they should have it and then they'll give them 20 grand to start the business. It's like you do it as an exercise for you and you happen to be able to use it for that stuff.
Yeah. And then you can reflect. Like one of the things that I did was coming from the idea of KPIs.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, here were my ideas, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And here's what I've done. It's not perfect, but I got to see what worked, right?
Yeah.
What worked, what comparatively like in the business versus on paper. And then also got to see sort of almost like looking back in time and saying, okay, here's things that I need to think about further or develop further, right? Things that might be working that were just a random bullet point that could be extrapolated into something that maybe grows even more business than you ever thought possible.
Sure.
So I do think, as lame as it sounds, KPIs can be found everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. And I kind of bolster KPIs as reward systems. So like the world is built on reward systems. It's like you look at big companies that have the reward systems drawn up wrong for the CEO. Look at what they do with the company, right? They'll do what's best for their pocketbook and not necessarily for their company quite often. So KPIs, reward systems, the same thing. You want to have like those situations set up in a way that is conducive to the success of yourself, your business. It's like you could have a KPI all day long that says, we get, how many views on Instagram, it's like, but if there's not a KPI in there, it's like what that actual will convert to, right? Then like, should it convert to a product? Should it convert to awareness? Should it convert to, it's like then it's a KPI for nothing, right? It's a vanity KPI. So there's a better way to describe it. Make sure you're not just pushing in on vanity KPIs.
Yeah.
Real reward system backed KPIs. And most KPIs in small business should be in some way connected to the P&L.
So I think it's important because when I was first starting my practice, and I know a lot of small businesses feel the same way, if you had to say, what are like some five KPIs that a small business that's just starting could start tracking? If you could come up with a few.
You know, like, I'm a big fan of like really embracing your numbers, right? And so like, and really analyzing that through your profit and loss sheet. And so it depends on the business too, what I would suggest there. But overall, like, everything has to make sense in the P&L. So I'm less about KPIs and more about the P&L, right? And I'm more in assessing and properly breaking down data in a way that you can understand what your business is. And so like, I actually don't spend a lot of time with small business people on KPIs, you know, it's like, and you know, that's where I kind of like disagree with the big business world, because I want it all to hit in your bottom line. You know, I want you to have your cost of goods aligned to your actual revenue stream, your sales stream, you know, and I want you to be able to see that data in that bucket, you know, what that's actually making in your business. Now you can tie that back to your marketing, right? And so like, let's say I have a cost of goods for Snickers bars, right? I properly bucketed that in my books. And now I have a revenue line for my Snickers bars. Now I can come over and I can see that month how much I made on Snickers bars. But guess what I also happened to do that month? I ran a Facebook campaign for Snickers bars, right? Specifically. How did that affect the bottom line in the P&L that month versus the month I didn't, right? And there's other ways to analyze that. You could say KPIs on like, so we ran that campaign, right, on Snicker Bar on Facebook. We got this many views, and for that many views, we got this many clicks, and for this many clicks, we got this many sales, right? You know, we could study each one of those KPIs, and we could say those many views led to this many clicks, so we want to get more views, more clicks, you know, that sort of stuff. But ultimately, what are we after? More sales of candy bars, right? More Snickers bars was what our goal was there. And so that's why I think it's more important to analyze the financial data and then build your KPIs backwards. So if I like the longest way possible to answer your question, it would have to do with what specifically we were talking about. I don't think there's 5 raw KPIs that you could just throw at a business.
I think on a service business that's not doing online sales, right? Because the online sales example is great, but also like, for someone that's, you know, is a knowledge worker, that's pretty out there, unless you're doing like, you know, influencer style, you know, webinar stuff where you are running ads inherently. Yeah. One thing that I think is time consuming, but it's kind of a loose KPI, right? It's not really KPI in the traditional sense, but tracking where your referrals are coming from. Yeah. And tracking where those referrals were made. So it all connects back to sort of, in my world, right? You know, you go to a networking event. Yep. You meet 5 new people. Yep. Those 5 new people go to coffee or lunch with you. Yep. And then let's say 6 months from now, you've gotten referrals over time and you're tracking where those referrals are coming from. Maybe you find out what through that, right? You're not going to necessarily be able to crunch the numbers on that, but at least you can look back on your year and say, okay, I met so-and-so at X event, and I also met 4 other people from that same event, and those people have all been referring to me. And maybe that's an event or a group or an organization that I should double down my time on, right? And then you look at other groups that maybe you went to every event and you've got nothing out of it. You can at least feel confident that that's time that you could claw back and spend elsewhere. So it's more like a review on like how good your time usage has been over the course of a year. I totally agree, and it's a great way to look at it. The worry that I have with KPIs too is they get so linear and focused that, like, now let's say in your example, just humor me for a second, like, you've done a really good job. You found out which networking group is, you know, like you've assessed those people on how many times you had to go to coffee and then like how many times that led into like actual income, right? But what if you were charging the wrong rates? Right? So now you've KPI'd really well in what's getting you more clients, but you also have to think about like, did I actually make money off of those clients, right? And so that's where I worry with small business people is they'll get so worried and hyper-focused on this KPI, they'll pay attention, because what gets paid attention to grows. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I always go back to the P&L.
because I want them paying the most attention to the P&L. You know, it's like, because that's where the value in the business truly is, right? It doesn't matter how many times we go to coffee overall, unless it's impacting the P&L in a positive way.
Well, I was thinking you could be going to coffee and find out that all the coffee is just costing you money in the P&L. And there's nothing coming from it.
You totally could, you know? And so, but time usage is also another like opportunity cost. Like the second I've learned about opportunity cost in life, you know, is like, that's a big deal. You know, it's like if your time is valued at $350 an hour, theoretically, anything you're doing outside of that $350 an hour that's worth less money, let's say you're cleaning your house, which could be hired out at $20 an hour, your opportunity cost is actually $320 an hour. You're better off sitting in your office and making the $320 an hour. Now, I always tell people too, there's an X factor to that too. You know, I still do my own landscaping. We talked about that this morning, you know, is that worth my time, right? Tyler values higher than he could hire a landscape to do. But then there's a mental KPI as well, you know? And so like, those are kind of the things that like really help set business apart is like, and that's way too, when you're like, especially when you're first starting in business and you're the only person, it's like the first thing you should start doing is analyzing the jobs that you're doing that aren't worth the rate that you're worth. And those are the things that have to get hired out. Great example is the landscaper. If you're hanging out around your business and you're so busy, you're thinking you need to hire somebody else, like the first thing you do is you start taking things off your plate that are worth a lot less than what your opportunity cost value system is, right? Usually for most people, that's pretty easy to assess too. With a lawyer, it's super easy. It's like, you know what you bill out at, right? It's like, that is your opportunity cost. Anything else you're doing outside of that, you know, like is not valuable. You need to do more of that thing that, you know, unless, for instance, my X factor. Nobody involves the X factor. That's why I always do, because the landscaping is good for my soul. It makes me feel like I accomplished something. You know, it's like that is more valuable to me than the time that I'm losing in money, right? And so you do want to assess those things too. Or let's say you love doing your marketing in your business. You like, that's your favorite part of your business. I'd still say do a little of your marketing. You know, it's like, even if that's hired out at a lesser rate, usually, you know, like you also have to like, love and passion for the things that you do in the business. That's why you can't just always use math or a KPI either, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Well, the passion is what drives you forward. So
it is.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, inherently, as a new business owner, you're going to find things that you love about running and operating your own business, and you're going to find things that you absolutely hate.
Yeah.
And some of it will be because you're a numbers person, and some of it is going to be because you're a words person, and some of it is because you're a workhorse and not a marketer. Or vice versa, you're the people marketer person, and you don't want to be, you know, chained to your desk doing all the work. And so I think only once you're in the you know, trenches and operating do you get to see sort of more about learn more about yourself in many ways. People can be surprised by what they actually embrace too. It's like when I first started in business, you could have never convinced me that I would become like so passionate for accounting, you know, never convinced me of that. You know, it's not like I started out as an accountant, you know, it's like, but then like once I realized like I love data, right? I love data to make good decisions with. And once I realized the more I focused on my accounting aspect, the better the data got to make decisions. It was like having a crystal ball finally, a way to make decisions that were educated, you know, outside of like reaching through the hallway, trying to find something in the dark, you know, now all of a sudden you had legitimate data backing it up. So also like, I guess a fundamental aspect in starting is like, I think, this is my personal opinion, you know, like everybody says we have this big theme on the internet these days, and my show is the antithesis of what's on the internet. You folks know that already. You know, it's like they always say if you're working in your business, you're doing it wrong. Fuck that. Not possible. Because number one, if you're starting from nothing, you're a bootstrapper, impossible not to work in your business. Oh, I don't have any money and I don't have a team and I have nothing, but I'm not going to work in my business. You're going to work in your business. And not only that, but it's like, I make this point all the time. When I took my MBA, they don't teach me how to be the biggest world's financial genius. They don't teach me how to be the best marketer in the world. What they do is they teach me a lot of these different things on fundamental levels so I can manage them. And that's what I would implore you in your own business too, for a lot of reasons. It's like, I want you to know enough to be dangerous in all these things. And the reason I want that for you is worst case scenario, you can manage it later on. You'll know if somebody's ripping you off. I had this guy that was a landscaper on the show. And he built from one lawnmower all the way up to a $10 million business, sold that company, and then he started a tech company.
And he wanted to, they're kind of like the Uber of lawn care. You can order up like lawn people to come to your house, you know? And what he started with was what everybody fundamentally thinks you should do. Like, you hire out the technology because that's what you're good at. He got robbed completely, spent all this money, nothing to show for it. And that's what I get all the time is like, you need to know enough to manage it, right? And by getting involved in your books, getting involved in your marketing early on, getting involved in all these things, there's nefarious creatures that dwell in marketing, that dwell in your accounting, that dwell in your website production. You know, be able to know whether they're robbing you or not or making impact. I see it every single day. We're in the hire out generation. I applaud people for that because yes, opportunity cost. But at first, know enough to be dangerous or you will get robbed. That's what's going on in the current business environment. You know, that is literally, it's bad consultants that are running the show these days. And that's what's destroying businesses more than anything I see. So know it enough to be dangerous. And at the same time, you never know what you're going to love and embrace. You know, it's like, no, I'm no good at accounting. Try it. I promise you it's easier than you think. And then once you have that data to run your business successfully, you'll love it. So I think we've given them enough today. What do you think?
Yes.
You got any final words for people?
I think, you know, at the end of the day, don't let anyone deter you from starting a business, because the first thing you'll do is be excited and tell everyone you know and love that you're going to start a business in whatever industry you're doing, whatever, and people are going to be naysayers. And I would say, don't listen to a word they say.
Oh, it's so well put. They won't believe in you at all until you do it, and then they all believed in you.
Yeah, forever. Yep, from the start.
Yeah, always knew it. You know, and I'll bolster that with the advice that I'm 1,000% sure that if you start the right business in the right way and you don't quit, you will make it. Right now, I will promise you that. You start the right business and you do a little bit of background research and you start smart, you will make it. I've never seen, and you don't quit.
Don't quit.
But aligning those things will help you not quit. That's why you have to start with the right idea, right? And it's not what you think it is. That's why you have to have a plan, because it makes it easier. And you can't quit. These two things help you not quit. And no quit, I guarantee you somebody will make it. I've never, ever seen somebody fail if they do that.
Agreed, 100%.
And that, my friends, is another episode of Underdogs, Bootstrappers, Game Changers. Paloma is a good friend of mine. I'm going to have her back. We'll talk about stage 2. So feel free to contact me and tell me anything we missed on this episode, and we'll pick it up again later. Thanks for joining us. Hello, and welcome to Underdogs, Bootstrappers, and Game Changers. This is for those of you that are starting with nothing and using business to change their stars. Motivating people who disrupted industry standards. This is the real side of business. This isn't Shark Tank. My aim with this podcast is to take away some of the imaginary roadblocks that are out there. I want to help more underdogs, because underdogs are truly who change the world. This is part of our Content for Good initiative. All the proceeds from the monetization of this podcast will go to charitable causes. It's for the person that wants it.